Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Gail Burke. And we have as our guest this evening a return engagement by the gentleman around town, Jim Modugno. Good evening, Jim. How are you today?
I'm doing good, George. And yourself?
Not bad. As we talked about doing another show the last time you were with us, it started to get through the issues of what's the city like. And if you go through Beverly now, there's a couple of signs up, Black Lives Matter, another one for all sorts of immigrants. The city council has passed a bunch of resolutions along the same line. One of the ones that's interesting is they've declared Black lives as a health hazard, which is interesting because I'm not sure what they're going to do about it. And when we talked to one of the city councilors, he wasn't sure either, but we got it. And we passed the budget, and in fact, your city councilor, Stacey Ames, made some recommendations and comments. That didn't get any traction. And the city council again voted the maximum taxes allowable, so taxes are going up. So, Jim, is this any way to run a government?
Well, George, it's a great question, and I think the answer should be absolutely no way. What we've been facing is a steady stream of increases on an average of about 3.76% over the last 5 to 6 budgets. The city budget just continues to grow. Even during a pandemic, it seems like the city is still in the same mode of spend, and spend some more. And the cost just keeps going up. And as a friend of mine said, one thing is, don't worry about the city going bankrupt. The citizens will go bankrupt first.
Yeah.
Right? So I think these expenses are extremely high, and they just keep going up. We keep adding positions into the city budget on a regular basis. And when you look at it, from my standpoint, I started looking at it from a totally different standpoint when I look at this and say, the budgets keep going up. We're trying to bring in as much revenue as we can, but there's a second side of a balance sheet, and that's expenses and how do you control your expenses and so forth. So when I start looking at that, then I got alarmed earlier when I saw the Beverly Salary Review Committee, and I don't know who they are, but supposedly they made this recommendation of a 12.5% increase for the mayor starting in 2022, and a 19% increase in payment to the city council as well as the school committee. And when I look at this big picture and look at what we're doing, I look at the services in the city, I look at the roads, I look at everything involved, and I'm saying to myself, we can't keep doing this, right? We're starting to look like, the big cities, the Bostons and the Springfields and the Worcesters who can't make ends meet on a regular basis. And then I started thinking about, well, maybe the mayor format is not the way we should be thinking anymore. Maybe we should be looking differently. Maybe we should have a city manager. Because if you think about it, in a mayor format, we're all at the mercy of the elected official, whoever that is, and they might have excellent political skills, but are they really good managers and stewards of our money?
Well, Jim, doesn't the Beverly City Charter come up for renewal? Is it this coming year, 2021, I'm sorry.
I had heard that they were going to begin looking at it again.
Because
they formed a charter commission, and
yeah, okay. Are you
Elliot and I have volunteered to be on it, and you notice we're not.
You're not?
No.
Well,
I think one of the jokes going around. One of the jokes going around a few years back is I got appointed to the building commission for the middle school, and the story was going around. That was Scanlon's last attempt to get even with Mike Cale for running, put me on the commission.
Well, I think it's a good idea to at least explore the city manager situation versus the mayor. But I also think, and I know there are people that would agree, on term limits. I think that particularly for the city council, it would seem to me that two terms, 4 years, maybe even 3 terms max, would be sufficient. And for the mayor, and George, you and I have discussed this in the past, along with Elliot, having a 4-year term for mayor with the possibility of having just 2 terms that he or she could serve.
Yeah.
I wonder if that might be something that the citizens would approve of.
Back in about 1994, when the Charter Commission made a big play, and it turned out to be a very strong mayor format, the compromise in that was to not to go to a 4-year term for a mayor,
Right.
but rather to stay at 2, meaning thinking that you could probably get at him better. I look at all these things and I'm saying to myself, maybe we should be looking at a whole different format. I look over some of the communities around us, right? In particular, one of the best run communities, I think most people would agree, has been Danvers.
The city
Danvers
manager.
has had a town manager for since 1951, if I remember looking up the detail correctly. They had one town manager, Mr. Marquis, who was there for 35 years. And they now have a gentleman who is now taken over for him. I think he's just entering year 6. And what you're looking at is, again, another very, very qualified individuals. And, they're really, when you start looking at the difference between a city manager and a mayor, the mayor's position, there's all kind of arguments for and against, and you can go out at all the sites where they have, for governing cities and towns and so forth. But the formats are really, if you look at it, in Massachusetts, there are, let me get the right number, 39 cities that have mayors, and 312 have what they call town managers or town administrators. And it seems like, depending on the size of your community, you might go with a town manager, you might go with a town administrator.
I've explored this issue with Paul Guanci, and he made a couple of interesting points on it that, thinking mostly about Jason Silva, who used to be on city council, and he has moved over to be the town manager in Marblehead. And he went back to school and got his master's degree in administration, and he's trained to handle this kind of a situation where the mayor, in most cases, is a popularity contest, where if you got a big enough family or you've got enough good friends around town, you can get elected. And it has nothing to do with whether you bring a good skill set to the job or not. And one of the concerns I have, as you started to mention about it, is they keep adding more and more people to the mayor's staff. And I think he's up to 5 now. And you start to wonder about who's really running the city. And I think the idea of having somebody who's trained in political issues as well as administrative skills would have a much better chance of operating it. And the same thing goes true that the city council has the hire and fire capability over the city manager. So it's not like you're giving up control forever.
Well, that's the beauty of term limits.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't get all this overabundance of people on the mayor's staff because they know they're only in there for 2 terms. And after that, they're gone.
Some of the arguments that I read against the mayor council form was that the office of the mayor ends up being it's a very powerful position. So if you look at it in the city of Beverly, our current mayor it's really the authority of one, right? He has all the hire and fire type of responsibilities. he puts his budget together, and really the council has little or no choice other to accept it or reject it or push back a little bit. But in the end of the day, you just don't see it happen. And it's also a political position when you think of it. And then I want you to think of some of the big issues that have come out around us now. And a mayor, a political mayor, is really, especially if they're career politicians, and I believe that the gentleman who is running the city of Beverly right now has a career. He's a career politician for all intents and purposes, if you look at his job employment type of thing. And what you end up is his own pet peeves, right? Global warming, right? He's all over that. I mean, it's a real big interest to him. Not that we don't all care about it, but decisions are made around that, his own theme. And also, think about it. The sign that flew, the Black Lives Matter sign that flew over City Hall, was a decision by the mayor. It wasn't a decision by the community. It really ended up creating a conflict. Whereas if you had a city manager, they wouldn't be making that decision, right? The other thing is the mayor in the city, in a city format that we have right now, makes all the decisions on salaries in terms of negotiations and so forth. And at the end of the day, George made a big point about getting reelected. When you have in the city teachers unions, police, fire, public works, everybody's a city. It has a union, right, within the city. And there's nothing wrong with unions. But the fact is, when you're doing those negotiations, there's a lot more risk. In a city manager type of format, the council, when you go to a town manager or a city manager, the council then plays a little bit more role in that thing as well. So there's some advantages. And it, quite frankly, if you get an incompetent mayor or somebody who lacks those skills, it could cost you more. So if you look at the city of Beverly right now, like George mentioned, they got an office of the mayor and 5 others. There's over $600,000 worth of salary and benefits just sitting in that office right there. And you got to begin asking yourself the question is, why is that? Why is it we added all these positions on EDI, right? One for the school, one for the city. Most of the time, these things are just absorbed into human resources and other things. So there's a lot of reasons to kind of look at a different format. I don't think we can afford politicians anymore running the cities at the highest level. I think we got to have competent city managers who have full responsibility after there's agreed upon what we're going to do in terms of a budget with the council. They take over, he takes over or she takes over, and they manage it on a day-to-day basis to meet all the goals and objectives, and also to get efficiencies so that, ultimately the goal is you should be providing the best possible services you can at a price that people can afford. And there needs to be some things like we always talk about in the business world, continuous improvement. You got to get improvements year after year. You got to be more effective. You just can't keep adding people. Because if you look at our budget, you're looking at about 78 to 80% of the budget is down with 3 different groups, right? It's people, it's healthcare benefits, and pensions. That leaves you only 20% to go find some cost savings. And the fact is, there's not a whole lot left on that 20% side. So you really got to think about how you approach government in terms of efficiencies. And, the problems that cities have are the same problems that businesses have, and they have to face them. And I remember Stacey Ames, she pushed back. She was pushing back, and, they couldn't even find a 1% savings that they could make a recommendation on. When you got a budget as big as that, you weren't even talking $1 million, and they couldn't find anything out of that big budget. So, and where's the pressure on them to stop it? Where do we go from here? I don't think this is the path that is sustainable. And again, when you look at the mayor council format rather than a selectman, I mean, we got 9 councilors. You look over in Damas, they have 5 selectmen who are working with the city manager, the town manager. And all these other communities, you're looking at 3 to 5 maximum in terms of councilors. So if we went to a city mayor format, yes, the city manager might cost you a little bit more money from salary standpoint, but you would be getting a competent day-to-day manager who can manage your budget. And when you get up around 140, 150, 160 million dollars, you just don't want to leave that in the hands of a politician. And that's my opinion on that thing. Now, I could be 100% wrong. And again, remember that any of these formats are not perfect.
Well, I was reading about the salaries of the city managers. And the average salary in the U.S. today is $106,408.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not out of whack, I don't think. Depending on the size of the city, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But something's got to change, because the same old can't work anymore. And like you said, when you keep adding positions, do we really need these positions? I mean,
Could you have done them differently, right?
Yeah. I mean, all this racism stuff is systemic racism. In Beverly, I don't believe it exists in the entire country, but
Right.
in Beverly,
When you have a mayor, when you have a mayor, a political elected position,
yeah,
then you can walk yourself in the problems that you may not even have. You look over in Danvers, and I'm just going to pick on Danvers in a nice sense. Their town manager is, obviously they've had great success with them, and they're willing to pay, and they believe that if you get a good one, you can save some money. So if we went out and hired a town manager or a city manager, and it costs us $175,000 or $180,000 a year, if you look at the city budget, look at that mayor's office right now, you'd probably save $400,000 just on the mayor's office, because you'd have somebody who knows how to do the job.
well, and also I think that increasing the salaries of the city council is a bit ludicrous. I do think that the school committee, even though I have felt for a long time that they weren't doing much of anything, but there's a huge disparity between what the school committee does and what the city council does. And I also remember looking at the number of meetings, at least this was a few years ago, that the city council had as opposed to what the school committee did. And they were getting almost nothing.
Well,
Got to raise salaries.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, the councilors make, I think it's $11,700 each.
Yeah.
I think the president of the board makes $12,500 or something. He makes a little bit more money, right? But when you think about it, in our community, I look back over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years, there's hardly any major discussions over anything. There's hardly any ever pushback by the council on any of these issues. When I went back in time and I think about certain things, the two people that come to mind all the time and push back has always been Donnie Martin. He's not there anymore. And John Burke, as much as he could be a lightning rod at times, he'd push back on issues and so forth. We just don't see that. And so therefore, the theme that goes around is we're paying, if you think about it, 11.7, just round it, right? And you look at it and you got 9 of them. It's over $100,000. And what are you getting for $100,000?
Not much.
Well, one of the issues that comes up is the reason for having a extension of the mayor's term from 2 years to 4 years is the guy gets in, he's new to the job, he just about learns where the facilities are, and he's got to run for re-election. So he needs a 4-year term to be able to develop the skill set and then apply it. And if you think about that, a town manager hits the floor running. He knows what he's doing. He knows how to run a business of a city, and you get good quality decisions the first year, and it's not a learning process.
Yeah.
So that, I think part of the problem they talk themselves into is a situation where it isn't working well, and if we do more of the same, it's going to be better.
And he knows that if he doesn't produce, he could lose his job. And that's important. And it's not going to be for any determined time. But I suppose with the contract, they have to sign some kind of a yearly contract or whatever the term is. But if he doesn't produce, he or she is gone. And I
Absolutely.
think that's important.
Yeah, and George, you both make excellent points. I think the fact is that, let's say, for instance, I ran for mayor and I won. Even though I have a master's in business administration and I've worked in the business world for all these years, there will still be a little bit of a learning curve in terms of public administration. However, if you hired a city manager, what you're getting is somebody who's got a master's in public administration. They know the ins and outs, the laws of the land, and what you can do and can't do in the state, and how to do it. And I think you get, as I think one of you said, you get somebody who potentially can come in and they have all the background, they have the experience. You're going to hire somebody who's got some experience, but they're going to be up and running right away. And if they don't produce and they don't do their job, then you can void their contract. You can fire them, right? How do you get your hands on a mayor in a political environment? You're going to recall him? You can't recall him. Even though you have a provision in the charter for recalling, it never will happen.
I wonder, now I know that Beverly and other communities have had problems with this defund the police movement that seems to be going around the country. Do you think that Mayor Cahill is in favor of it? Is he opposed to it, or is he somewhere in the middle?
My take on it is, I think Mike is a smart guy, right? I think he knows that defunding the police is not a winning theme. It's not justified. It's not good. It's not good business. It's not good management, and it's not good community. How would you say, involvement? It doesn't make any sense. There's no justification for it. We have the finest, probably one of the finest police departments on the North Shore. It's well run. Seem to be right on top of things on a regular basis. So I don't think he's for it. But if you're in a political position, you could get bullied into it.
That's right.
Just like, that flag flew over City Hall. Somebody got bullied into that, right? I mean, that didn't just happen, right? Just overnight. Somebody got bullied and pushed into it. And then just by the same token, you the council and the school both agree in that racism or is a public health issue, right? Politicians get bullied into things, even though they may not agree with it, even though they don't think they should do it, they just get bullied. And I think we need to run cities and towns as businesses, right? It doesn't mean you can't have a social aspect of it. And that's what your councilors are there for to some degree. But you make business decisions based on facts, not on emotions. And I think much of what we see is a lot more emotion and lack of actual data that supports anything. So I don't think he's for it. But then again, I'm not in his mind. I'm not sure where he's going to go with it. But
to the point you're making, the issue came up in one of these human resources Zoom meetings, where the discussion came up of what happened to the flag and where did it go and who took it down and who put it up. And there came to be a strong pushback from the social justice group that the Black Lives Matter flag should fly all the time. And they started pressuring the mayor, exactly like you said, well, when are you going to make this happen? And he was under a similar kind of pressure from other groups to say, now, wait a minute, that's not exactly the ideal American organization. And I won't get into all that stuff, that's another show. Right. But so he's sitting there and he's being bullied, and he just couldn't make up his mind or couldn't agree with them at the time, which I got to give him credit for, that he didn't
Absolutely.
Knuckle under. But at the same time, it's exactly what you said. Pressure groups can work on politicians. They can't work very effectively on city managers, although you like to keep using Danvers as an example. They had a little dust up over whether you can put Blue Lives Matter or a Blue Life flag on public vehicles. And that's went around for a while. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of these issues around that small pressure groups can have a significant effect. And that's why a lot of people like the political system and don't like the idea of a business that you can't turn them around very quick.
Well, I
Yeah.
think that's
And
why
you think,
it's
sorry,
important to have a strong person in charge, because the defund the police movement is going across the country, and major cities are doing it. They're not totally defunding, but they're slashing the budgets in Austin, Texas, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, even Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a real possibility that someone like your mayor could be bullied into maybe not totally defunding, but cutting back on the budget. And we know, because we've interviewed the chief of police and Sergeant Costa
Yeah.
from the police department, that cutting back on the budget of the police is lunacy. As far as I'm concerned, it's absolute lunacy because what happens when you cut their budgets, more crime starts to happen. And that's evidenced all over the country.
Well, I think
And if
the
you
other
think about
show
it,
that we did with Lisa on the health monitoring situation pointed out the economic benefit of having another social worker available at the police departments, because they can perhaps avoid having to send somebody by ambulance to the hospital or by ambulance to one of the mental health institutions. And she came up with a number. It's like $45,000 a month that Beverly is spending handling these kinds of situations. And that would more than pay for having another social worker available on staff to avoid some of these issues. So again, that kind of a decision is something that a city manager or a town manager could make rather quickly and rather judiciously, as opposed to getting into the politics and the pressure groups. And with that, I think we about run out of time. So we'd like to thank you, Jim, for joining us. And obviously, this is a subject that's going to stay on the front burner for quite some time. So we'd like to invite you to come back again with some more good information. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As we say, if you have a different opinion, both Gail's email and my email shows up in the credits that follow. And send us an email and we'll get you on the show. And we'd like to hear your opinion. Thanks again for watching.
Nice to see you again, Jim.